Well, this is a first video on operations with integers and terms. So, what is an integer? Well, an integer are the whole numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but also the opposites of those: negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. And of course it goes forever, negative 5, negative 6, all the way to negative infinity, and it goes forever to the right in terms of the positive integers. The integers don't include any fractions and decimals in between the whole numbers, just the whole numbers. All right? So when we talk about operations with integers, you might first of all think about greater than or less than. You know that 3 is greater than 1. Why do we call it 3 greater than 1? Because greater than means to the right of on the number line. So 3 is to the right of 1 on the number line, so we say that 3 is greater than 1. But negative 2 is to the right of negative 3. So negative 2 is greater than negative 3. Alright, so greater than means to the right of. Now, negative 3 is less than positive 1 because negative 3 is to the left of 1 on the number line. Now, absolute value, why is absolute value of 2 equal to positive 2? Well, absolute value means the distance from 0. So here's 0. So how far away is negative 2 from 0? Well, it's 2 units. It's 2 jumps, or 2 units away from 0. So negative 2, the absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2 because the distance always is positive, and the distance from 0 is positive 2. In the same way, the absolute value of positive 2 is also 2 because the distance that 2 is from 0 is 2 units. Now what does this mean? This means the opposite of. The opposite of negative 3 is positive 3, or we would just write 3. So when you put a negative sign in front of something, that means the opposite. So the opposite of negative 3 is positive 3. Okay? There's some basics. Now adding integers. When you have a problem that says 5 plus negative 3, you could think of the 5 as cash because it's positive. Cash in your pocket is a positive thing, right? Well, the negative 3 could be thought of as debt. You owe someone $3. So if you have $5 cash and $3 of debt, well, you take $3 of the cash and pay off your debt, you have positive 2. In other words, you have $2 of cash. So that's why 5 and negative 3 is positive 2. Here's another one. If you have negative 4 and negative 2, well, you could think of it as debt and debt. And you know that debt and debt makes more debt. So it would be negative 6. So two negatives, when you add them together, you don't get a positive. Two negatives, when you add them, gives you a larger negative number. In other words, a negative number with a higher absolute value. Here's another example, 8 added with negative 10. Now, the negative number is a larger number, so the absolute value is larger, so you end up with a negative, because if you have $8 in cash and $10 of debt, you have more debt than cash, so you end up with $2 of debt, so negative 2. Now that is the same thing as 8 minus 10. If you have $8 of cash and you spend $10, well, you end up negative, don't you? So you see that adding negative 10 and subtracting 10 is the same result. So that brings me to the definition of what subtracting integers is. Subtracting a minus b is the same as adding negative b. So a minus b is the same as a plus negative b. Now that's called the rule of subtraction, and it can be used in any problem such as this. 5 minus 9 could be thought of as 5 plus negative 9. And here, of course, you got more debt than cash, so you end up negative 4. Here, you have 5 minus negative 1. All right, well, using this rule of subtraction where you change a minus into adding the opposite, so we're going to change minus here into adding the opposite. So we end up the opposite of negative 1. Well, a negative of a negative, the opposite of a negative, is a positive. So you end up with 5 plus 1, or 2, or 6. So that's how you can subtract a negative. You basically, subtracting a negative is the same as adding the positive, and you end up with 6 in this case. One more example. You have negative 3 minus 10. You could think of that minus 10 as adding negative 10. So you have a debt, and a debt makes more debt, negative 13. All right, let's talk about multiplying integers. So you know that 3 times 2 is 6. What about, we'll drop 3 down to 2, so 2 times 2, well, of course, that's 4. Drop 2 down to 1, so 1 times 2 is 2. We're continuing, 3, 2, 1, now 0. 0 times 2, of course, is 0. So let's continue this pattern. 3, 2, 1, 0, then negative 1 times the 2. All right, negative 1 times 2 comes out to what? Well, what does this pattern show? 6, 4, 2, 0. We're dropping down by 2. If you drop down 2 from 0, you get to negative 2. Okay, so negative 1 times 2 must be negative 2. Same way, negative 2 times 2, well, drop down another 2, you get to negative 4. So a negative times a positive, you can see, is a negative. All right, let's look at this pattern over here. 2 times negative 2. Well, we just said 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Okay. 1 times negative 2. Well, we had a similar thing here, but you would suspect that would be negative 2. And then 0 times anything is 0. So let's examine the pattern. 2 times negative 2, 1 times negative 2, 0 times negative 2. So our first number is dropping, 2, 1, 0. So what's the next number after 0? Of course, negative 1. So if you have negative 1 times negative 2, what's a negative times a negative? And I usually put negatives in parentheses, but what's negative times a negative? Well, let's follow this pattern. Negative 4, negative 2, 0. Notice that we're adding 2 each time. Add 2 to negative 4, you get negative 2. Add 2 to negative 2, you get 0. So you would suspect that we would add 2 again, which gives positive 2. And so you can see that the result of multiplying 2 negatives is a positive. And you could continue the pattern and have negative 2 times negative 2, which, according to this pattern, should be positive 4. Likewise, if we bring this to negative 3, and then multiply by negative 2, you would expect it to be positive 6. So this kind of explains why a product of 2 negatives must be a positive. Alright, so what about general rule? Well, if we have a positive times a negative, you will get a negative. Or a negative times a positive would give you a negative. Or we talked about how 2 negatives would equal a positive. Okay. What about 3 negatives? What would that give us? Well, if 2 negatives make positive, then the first 2 negatives multiplied together is a positive. A positive times a negative, as in up here, is a negative. So we would expect it to be a negative. So any 2 negatives would come together to make a positive.
So that means that if we had an odd number of negatives, like this extra negative here, you would expect it to be negative. That's exactly right. Here's a general rule. An odd number of negatives makes it negative. An even number of negatives makes it positive. So that's in general the rule you can follow when we have multiplication. Now what about dividing figures? Well, the same rules apply. If you have positive divided by a negative, that is going to be a negative because you have an odd number negative. You have a negative divided by the same thing. But if you have a negative because of the rule of number of negatives is positive, this would be positive. Okay? So if